So here, Dr. Fletcher talks about tragicomedy as a genre. So this is a mashup of the genres of tragedy and comedy. It doesn't follow the tradition in Greek tragedy or Greek comedy exclusively. Tragicomedy plays with elements of both. This is a genre that's become very popular in television in the last 15 years or so. The term dramedy gets thrown around a lot. You get these serious shows with bits of comedy and absurdism thrown in. It's a genre that's been around for a very long time, but I think it's become, in my very uninformed opinion, it's become much more popular than it used to be. It didn't used to be as relatable for audiences. I think it's a bit more of an acquired taste. It's more complicated in some ways, but it's definitely become more ubiquitous, and I think people have gotten used to it, So anyway, Dr. Fletcher, he traces the origins of tragicomedy to the Greek playwright Euripides, and he talks about how Samuel Beckett and T.S. Eliot wrote plays after World War II that had strong tragicomic elements, and he discusses Alison Bechdel's work. She's a cartoonist who works with darker themes for comic effect. So in all of this, he points out how tragicomedy can actually help people work through PTSD, which I think is so interesting and cool. There's different subtypes of PTSD. So if you experience something horrific, it can cause a very strong, emotionally hyperactive response when you recall that memory. Or you can react with numbness. You can sort of go emotionally dead inside. Those are sort of the two types of PTSD that there are, the two ways you can have a hyperactive emotional response to a traumatic event. And the emotional deadening is regulated by our frontal cortex. Again, that's the topmost layer of our brain, the logical part of our brain, the part of our brain that evolved most recently. So the frontal cortex basically tells our limbic areas of the brain, these are our underlying emotional brain areas, responsible for our emotions. The frontal cortex tells those areas to shut down if something is too painful. Frontal cortex basically just says, limbic system, play dead. This hurts too much, pretend like this never happened, go numb. So you get this sort of internal dissociation from yourself. And there's two types of dissociation. One, there's depersonalization. That's when our thoughts and feelings feel unreal. Sort of like ghosts inside our mind that we don't feel directly related to. And then there's derealization, and that's when the outside world doesn't seem genuine, sort of like a dream that we're just sort of drifting through, but not connected to. So with Greek tragedy, Dr. Fletcher discusses tragedy as a literary form that helped people deal with the first type of PTSD, that sort of emotionally hyperactive response. When you watch a tragic play together with others, the audience is exposed to trauma in what is otherwise a safe environment, potentially surrounded by friends and family. It's a form of exposure therapy to try to sort out that traumatic event, right, in a safe environment. Cognitive behavioral therapy in that vein. But then Euripides sort of flips this on its head a bit with his tragicomedies. With tragedy, we feel connected to everyone around us. There's this sort of shared social support in experiencing the play and the trauma to the characters in the play. We experience that all together. With tragicomedy, things get a little weirder, right? It actually heightens our self-awareness, right? It makes us look more inwardly and assess our own feelings even more. We don't get an obvious answer from the play itself. It just makes us assess whether the behavior is funny or tragic. Is this hilarious or sad? It's ambiguous. We're kind of unsure, and so we have to pause and think more about what we're seeing and experiencing with this type of literature. The psychological neural effect in our brain is that this actually helps alleviate the numbness of type 2 PTSD because it helps us relax our emotional brake on our limbic system, right? The frontal cortex was telling the limbic system, shut down, shut down, shut down. Tragicomedy invites us to reevaluate our feelings in this weird situation and it opens us back up to feeling something again in this subtle kind of backdoor, bizarre way. What am I feeling about this weird, tragic, strange, funny thing? What am I feeling and why? So, unlike a classic tragedy that triggers raw emotion in our limbic system, Euripides' tragicomedy inspires a sort of meta feeling in our frontal cortex. Instead of our frontal cortex telling our emotions not to exist, our frontal cortex starts looking at the emotions and asking why we have them. And if the tragicomedy is funny enough and prompts us to not only evaluate our complex emotions more in depth, but actually laugh as well, that loosens up our emotions and engages us with them even more. So we're able to be less emotionally numb.